watching. Some say he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Make your own mind up as BBC4 presents Tom Harrisson, the Barefoot Anthropologist.
Few today will have heard of Tom Harrisson, but in wartime Britain he was a household name. He was a controversial adventurer, a revolutionary kind of anthropologist, and a guerrilla fighter who was dropped by air behind Japanese lines into the heart of Borneo. He was also a prize-winning documentary filmmaker and a far-sighted conservationist. Always taking what he learned in one field and applying it to the next, he was a man impossible to pigeonhole.
His mind was sparking off in every direction all the time. He had ideas going there, and someone said to me once, 9 of them were absolute nonsense, but one of them was always absolutely brilliant.
He could be called by some, I think, a great man. He was a man who was big in many different fields. There are very few people like that today.
He was also an eccentric in the classic English mould.
He was always able to surprise me, and anybody who can do that, I think, is worthwhile knowing.
He could be arrogant, belligerent, egocentric, often drunk, and nearly always deliberately outrageous.
Tom Harrisson restarted headhunting in Borneo.
Well, I was always rather nervous of him, as everybody was. He was a bit of a bully. He was a bully. Yeah.
Some people loved him, and some people really didn't like him, really hated him.
Mr. Harrisson.
He was the Antichrist of anthropology.
He was a chauvinist and a snob.
In his day, Tom Harrisson's own unique brand of anthropology was way ahead of its time, but with it went a love affair with controversy and a lifelong battle with the establishment. Perhaps because of that, he's now all but forgotten. But some 30 years after his death, there's still much his life can teach us. I first came to know Tom Harrisson some 50 years ago when he and cameraman Hugh Gibb came to me at the BBC with material for 6 documentary films, all shot in the tropical jungles of Borneo. It was a diverse and groundbreaking series that in many ways encapsulated the many skills of this remarkable man. As a whole, the Borneo story was far and away the best travel series we'd shown at the BBC at that time, and in the style of the day, each episode was introduced by Tom Harrisson.
First of all, let me put you in the big picture. Well, now here's Singapore, up here is China, and this is Borneo. The trouble with anything in Borneo is knowing where to begin.
And so too with Tom Harrisson. It was indeed here, in the thick jungles of Borneo, that he spent much of his remarkable career. But the only way for us to understand him is to start at the very beginning. He was sent to the prestigious English public school Harrow, where its elaborate system of privilege and status fascinated the young Harrisson. But Harrow was a long way from home. He was born in 1911 to English parents in Argentina, where his father was building railways. He and his brother were soon sent back to England for schooling, and these early years of his life were to leave a profound mark on his character. He reflects on those school days in a radio interview in 1960.
When I came back to England, and I remember with horror being more or less dumped, I hope my mother won't mind me saying this, dumped at a boarding school at the age of 6½, because she had to go back to South America and be with my father.
They were farmed out with these, sort of people who took children in the holidays, and apparently that was rather unhappy. But he remembers it with horror, yes. In fact, his parents were too keen on going fishing, enjoying themselves in the Argentine, perhaps didn't want to be bothered with them.
But I think this thing of being born in another country does make a great deal of difference. And this feeling, both of belonging intensely, emotionally, sentimentally with England, and yet of not belonging to it and finding its habits and its people and its voices and its faces strange, keeps on producing sensations, even to this day, of strangeness wherever I go. Though I suppose I got a good deal out of it, all the time I never really fitted in, and I reacted by first of all taking tremendous interest in all the boys in the school without wishing to speak to any of them, so that during the whole time I was there I knew the name and kept the card index of every boy in the school. And secondly, I found an outlet in studying the whole environment and became extremely interested in birds in the most unpromising place, the suburbs of London, which Harrow now, of course, is entirely absorbed by. While at Harrow, I wrote a book on birds, the Harrow District, and that set me off on birds.
Still a schoolboy, he contributed to the development of bird-watching as it is today, not only with his innovative book, but also at the age of 19, by assembling an army of over 1,300 volunteers to make a census on a single bird, the great crested grebe. This pioneering study was the high point in an otherwise lonely childhood. Throughout his life, he was never without his notebook, always recording what he saw. And then he began to observe people with the same objective detachment with which he observed birds. The Anthropologist was born. He continued his bird census when he went up to Cambridge in 1931, where it put him in touch with some of the great men in British natural sciences. But it was soon clear that academic life was not for him. Still a misfit, he matured into a rebel, out to shock. He painted his toenails and walked through the streets in open sandals, which satisfactorily outraged the authorities. Soon he walked out of the university altogether, impatient to set off and gain experience and knowledge firsthand. He began attending meetings of the Oxford University Exploration Society, where his ornithological connections won him places on a series of expeditions, culminating in one he organised himself. In 1932, 7 young men, personally selected by Harrisson, and most barely out of their teens, set sail for Sarawak in British Borneo, a country with a marvellously rich natural history. On their arrival, they were met by Edward Banks, the government ethnologist and museum curator, who was to be their leader. Perhaps not surprisingly, that first meeting didn't go down too well. He writes of their first encounter. Mr. Banks and I, from the moment we met on the messy Kuching Wharf, did not see eye to eye. It must have been intolerable to him to have to work in his own country alongside a highly egocentric undergraduate in approximate charge of more. It was no surprise, then, that these young men, under Harrisson's leadership, soon cut loose from the supervision of Banks and set off by themselves into the interior in search of adventure. He was supposed to be surveying birds, but he was instantly attracted to the local people, the Dayaks, who welcomed him warmly. They lived communally in longhouses, and until recently they had been headhunters. This was his first encounter with a place and a people whom he liked and who liked him from the beginning. He immersed himself in their culture, and he loved it.